Morning, everyone. It's Joe Waxman. I'm back with another mini reading. This morning, I'd like to look at the chart of Osho Rajneesh, the guru, spiritual teacher, controversial figure from the, I guess, I don't know, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Don't know exactly when he died, but that's not really important. Initially he was Rajneesh, and then he was very controversial, got in trouble, and then changed his name to Osho. But let's get into it. And as always, if you want to book a reading, go to macroastrology.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. All right. Okay. Osho Rajneesh. December 11th, 1931, 5:13 p.m. in Kuchwada, Madhya Pradesh, India. All right. Now, Osho was very popular, but disliked by many, just as many as liked him. But he did have a huge following, and he did amass a fortune and all kinds of stuff. And there was a lot of controversy around him, but he was very interesting and very, very smart, very wise. Had a lot of fascinating things to say. All right, his sun is in Sagittarius in the 7th house, pretty much conjunct the descendant. And this very much, I mean, he was very much a Sagittarius, just very wild and free and philosophical. And the 7th house is not the best position for the sun because this is the house of relationships, and the sun can really, it's just too intense a placement for healthy relationships. And it also describes what you tend to attract in a partner. So here, our sun in the 7th is being very egotistical, shining brighter than anything, basically blinding everyone and everything in its path in relationships, and not seeing anything except its own ego. And it's attracting similar type people. So they're both being blinded, two suns coming together, blinding each other. Nobody's seeing anything except their own light. And there's too much ego. However, I mean, when we look at Osho's life, this is also the house of the masses, as opposed to the 11th house, which is the house of groups gathered around a central theme. This is just the unmitigated masses, the open masses, the world. When we look at his life, it wasn't really about personal relationships. I mean, that might have been a part, especially when he was young. We don't have much details about his early life, but for what he was, this world, he was a worldly figure, a worldly spiritual figure. Like up on the stage, speaking to large groups of people. It's actually quite appropriate because this can hold the spotlight for a lot of people, right? Here he can sit on stage and just shine brightly for a lot of people. And of course, it's not, some people are going to have a problem with that, because he's just so dominant in that way. And he's going to attract other, competitors. A lot of competition comes with sun in the 7th. And he felt competitive towards others, and he often talked about it. And he was like, he could be very crass sometimes, or he could be very polite and respectful with his competition. But I know he was like critical of Gandhi, and he was very respectful of J. Krishnamurti, but still there was a little sort of competitive criticism there and egotism. And some people don't like the ego that you see with Osho. I don't particularly care about the egotism because everyone has it. They're just expressing in different ways, and I don't think he was the most enlightened being ever to walk the earth, but he certainly was very enlightened, more enlightened than, he was an enlightened being, just not like the most highest high enlightened, in my opinion. He's a bit of a trickster. Now, I mean, what really stands out is this intense stellium in Capricorn, really intense, with, hemmed in, sort of sandwiched in, all these benefics sandwiched in by Mars and Saturn. with a pretty wide spread from 1 to 21. That's 20 degrees of separation, but still, Mars and Saturn are a very intense combination. I know I have Mars conjunct Saturn by 11 degrees, but it's still conjunction. Mine's in the 10th house, but it can be, for instance, you see people who are notorious for being cruel with Mars and Saturn combinations, or Mars, Saturn, Pluto, or something like that. Mars, Saturn, and then Venus is in between, and they're going to be really cruel to women. But like Pablo Escobar has Mars and Saturn tightly conjunct on, like, in the 7th house, conjuncted to Saturn. He was the notorious drug lord, famous for, being cruel and violent. So Mars and Saturn together can be very cruel and violent. But here we have Moon, Venus, Mercury, and we can't just talk about like Moon alone. And we've got to talk about this whole thing because it's so prominent. I mean, Venus conjunct Mercury makes it very sweet talking, honey-tongued, good at talking, and the conjunct Moon makes him very sensual, leaning towards comforts, lazy, but all of it's in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn here. So there's different sides. The Saturn is going to make him very hardworking, right? And the Capricorn is going to restrict all this. So you can see it if you hear him talk. The way he talks sometimes is like very slow, and he like lets the S sound go, tss, and that's reminds me of a snake. But what's interesting is that it's the 8th house. I mean, we're in the tail end of the 7th house, but the whole stellium is basically moving into the 8th house, and it's 8th house influence. It's very interesting, right? He has a lot of secrets. There's a lot of hidden things with Osho, and he dealt with secrecy, and he was known as the sex guru in India because he wanted to liberate sex, and 8th house deals with sex and death and rebirth and occult mysteries, the secrets of life, hidden things, right? Shared resources, other people's money, taxes, and it's the house of transformation. It's the house where there's a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, a lot of crisis and growth and intensity and intimacy. So he brought all of that into the spiritual world because he was a spiritual guru, right? That was his main thing. Now, he must have had it very difficult in his early childhood, judging by the Moon in Capricorn conjunct Saturn. It's a very difficult position, right? That shows incredible emotional restriction, starvation, not physical starvation, emotional starvation when he was young by his mother, by his early upbringing, just hard work, no emotional satisfaction. So he had it difficult when he was young, and that probably pushed him towards spirituality, as I often can do. And, he found great, benefit in spirituality. It was able to heal this deeply hungry, starving Moon for affection, this deeply pained 8th house Saturn Capricorn. I mean, that's a really hurting Moon, right? Luckily, we got Venus here, so it's not like Venus helps the Moon, and Moon helps Venus. Does Moon help Venus? Yeah, I mean, it does and it doesn't. I mean, I think it does because, like, normally we'd say there's not a great conjunction because Venus is very materialistic and wants money and luxury and romance, and it's kind of superficial. Whereas Moon is just like the love of mother for a child. It's a very different nature of love. Yes, they both deal with femininity and love, but Venus wants money and luxury and cars and sweet things and all the good life. The good life. Venus is that good life significator. Moon wants to love his children and to be that perfect, pure emotional love. It's more representative of the heart. It's more representative of pleasure, right? The sense organs, sensual. And Mercury is the mind, the intellect. Mercury and Venus together are very artistic, very creative. But Capricorn will make it all very hardworking and driven. And Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So here we have two strong, these are the strongest, Saturn and Mars, and they're hemming all these three benefics in there. So that's it's difficult. It's difficult. You know, these are the sensitive, more sensitive planets, the mind, the intellect. Venus is the feminine sensuality, the art, leisure, pleasure, joy, and moon is the emotions, the heart, the mind, the inner mind. So, I mean, he needed to turn towards spirituality, otherwise this would have been an issue. Yeah. And it's interesting that this Capricorn, and we don't normally think of Capricorn as being like a sign of spirituality, but here it is. And you see it in others too. Like, I can't remember. I know like Alan Watts had significant Capricorn, and I'll have to do his chart soon. I can't remember his whole chart. I just remember Capricorn. So we don't always see like, you know, what you'd expect, like Pisces and 12th house for spirituality. Sure, there's going to be that with some. I mean, here we have Neptune in the fourth, so it shows very spiritual upbringing from childhood. We combine that. You know, you have to look at both the moon and the fourth house. But Virgo is very hardworking. Virgo is chop wood, carry water. It's mundane life. It's health. It's critical. It's puritanical, perfectionist. So very clean. You know, disciplined in that sense. But this is dreamy, spiritual. So he's combining two different things. So there was a strong element of spirituality in his early childhood development. And then here we have Jupiter dispositing the sun, and it's making a trine to the sun. So that's good. That's they're trading places. It's making them, you know, it's a mutual aspect actually, because Jupiter is in the sign of the sun, Leo, and sun is in the sign of Jupiter, and they're aspecting each other. So seventh house and third house are trading places. So Jupiter, the wisdom, the teacher, the guru, is in the third house. It's opposite its natural zodiac position in the 12th house. But what it does is, like, you know, if you ever listen to Osho, he could be very crude and crass, and he could, you know, like humorous too. If you ever heard his, he wrote a whole spiel, and I'm not sure, maybe he got his helpers to write it. He was a bit of a trickster. But it was all about fuck, and how like God is dead. Now it's replaced by the word fuck, I guess. God. It's very like, you know, very almost taboo, you know, which is very eighth house, you know, sacrilegious, but funny and humorous at the same time. That's Jupiter in the third house, because third house is not high-minded. Third house is like hanging out with your neighbors, like telling dirty jokes, that sort of thing. And here he has this Jupiter, which is a symbol of guru, spirituality, down in the third house, hanging out with neighbors, telling dirty jokes, you know, neighbors, siblings, casual friends, things like that. But he could write and speak about philosophy very well from the third house, Leo. Leo would make him very natural on stage. Jupiter in Leo wants to be seen and heard on stage. And it's connecting very well to the sun in the seventh, which is the masses. So he could take his dirty humor out to the masses with this connection, and it was very natural. He's bringing the masses down to his, you know, neighborhood level dirty jokes, and then bringing his dirty joke wisdom out to the masses both, right? And he's bringing partners into his neighborhood, into his, you know, street talk, and back and forth like that. And of course, Gemini Ascendant. Gemini Ascendants are very, well, they're like any ascendant, they represent the sign. They're very Geminian. You know, Gemini Ascendants are talkative, funny, tricksters in themselves. You know, they're just all over the place. Smart, this can be a great way with words, like Gemini Sun, but even more so in some ways because it's so on the surface, right? I'm a Gemini Sun and Venus, and sometimes, you know, I'll watch a Gemini Ascendant, and they'll appear more Gemini than me, right? Because that's the nature of the Ascendant. It's very, very profound, it has a profound influence. And the ascendant lord is in the 8th house, Mercury. And here he's also, we're seeing like Mercury conjunct Mars, very argumentative. And he could be very argumentative. And this Mars is ruling the 6th house, also the 11th house. So he's bringing in, you know, his cult leaders into the wide open. So cult, you know, I mean, you could say he was a cult leader. I mean, I'm not using that in an offensive way, but there were certainly cultish behaviors going on. And 11th house would be the house to see cult-like stuff, possibly 9th house too. You know, North Node in the 9th house would be like making a new religion. But he has North Node in the 11th house, making a new, you know, cult around his religion. Group, network, very strong networking. So his group was made famous. You know, you can see that, okay? Mars in the 7th. But also bring a lot of conflict. He was, there was conflict with the government in India, Capricorn, because Mars is bringing the 6th house with conflict and enemies into the 8th house or 7th house here, but into the 8th, moving into the 8th house. But 7th house is not very good. 8th house is better because it's the 6th and the 8th. It's I forget what it's a certain yoga in Vedic. It means, you know, when a conflict house, 6th, 8th, 12th, moves into one another, it creates something good. Out of bad comes good. But this is 6th and the 7th, so it's not so good. It was problems with the government in India, and then later problems with the government in America, lawsuits and things like that. He was kicked out of America, and he was banned from entering so many different countries. That's Capricorn. So he had his problems, even though Mars is exalted in Capricorn, probably protected him somewhat, but there was still a lot of issues that he had to face with this Capricorn stellium and 6th house in the Capricorn sign. Yeah, and it tied in his group became, there were a lot of implications, some very disturbing stuff, like there was a murder attempt. And he was driving around in a Rolls Royce, lots of money. But so what made, oh, and then Pluto. Pluto is opposite of stellium. It's really opposite Saturn, but it's then in next opposite Moon, then Venus, and it's still affecting this whole thing. That's bringing in a lot of manipulation, power over, control, abuse with you know, people in his life. You know, maybe he was abused when he was young by other people, but then later he became a manipulative, psychological trickster, abuser. That's why he's so tricky. And if you look at Osho, if you look at his teachings, it's like, yeah, sometimes he's saying like really wise stuff. Other times you can just feel the sense where he's trying to manipulate you, and he's trying to get you to believe things just because he can, just because he's brilliant, he's a genius. Like, let's face it, he didn't get to where he was because he's dumb. He's not a dumb guy at all. He's one of the smartest guys, you know, who one of the smartest, you know, philosopher, spiritual types to ever live. He wouldn't have been famous otherwise. And I'll get to why soon. But he was very psychological, manipulative, twisting the narrative to suit his secret hidden agenda. He's a trickster. Like, you have to beware of Osho. He'll say things just because he can, just because he's smart enough to get away with it, just because he's smart enough to, you know, manipulate people in a certain way. But he was manipulated, make no mistake. And he was controlling. And Pluto and Saturn are very, very heavy opposition. This is Saturn in Capricorn, so it's no lightweight. And then Pluto in Cancer, so the Pluto in Cancer is very deep and emotional. But this is 8th house. So this is a very psychological aspect. And he was always utilizing psychological manipulation with how he engaged with people, because this is a relationship aspect. All opposites are, all oppositions show relationships with others. And you could tell that. So my alarm bells always go off when I'm, watching or reading Osho. Not that everything he says is to be paranoid about, because he says some great things and he was very wise, no doubt. But there are some things, like he tried to make a case against yoga, why we shouldn't do yoga or something like that. And I could just feel like I have Pluto trying my sun and Venus, so I have a sixth sense in the 12th and 8th house. That's probably why, or South Node conjunct Jupiter, maybe that's why, or anyway, whatever. I feel like I have a sixth sense, but yeah, that article against yoga, it was just like very manipulative, and he was just trying to manipulate the audience, basically. So enough about that. What made him so brilliant? We still really haven't figured that out yet, but I see a lot here. First of all, look at all these out-of-bound planets. Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. And let's just look at that for a second. Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. All these four are out of bounds, not the Saturn, but all these four. And what out of bounds planets mean, it's usually just one's out of bounds, like the moon maybe, or Mars or something like that. Out of bounds means out of bounds. When the sun moves in the sky, all the planets follow on the ecliptic. They fall in a line like that, right? And they have a certain range that they spiral around. When it's out of bounds, it means it's going further than the normal range. And there's a certain degree, it's 23 degrees in some minutes. But these are all out of bounds. These moons like 27, all the other ones are 24. And what it does, for the moon, it creates a very wide emotional swings, because the moon is always waxing and waning anyway. So when a moon is out of bounds, emotional swings become even bigger. Higher highs, lower lows. But also it creates out of bounds thinking, like a very Uranian type, very just inventive, new, like not conforming to the status quo agenda. These people are just out of the box thinkers. They can start new things. They can also be criminals. You sometimes see criminals with out of bounds planets and out of bounds. And he was out of bounds. I mean, like he prided himself. He made a point of being out of bounds with everything he did. And this whole force, from Moon to Mars, they're all out of bounds in Capricorn, 8th house, very extreme, very extreme. Not only that, we're getting a square from Uranus, even furthering that whole theme of being out of bounds. Uranus is the out of bounds significator, the out of bounds planet, the planet of awakening, the planet of brilliance, the planet of enlightenment, the planet of individuality, the planet of rebellion, the planet of thinking about society as a whole, really big-minded, right? And so it's aspecting all these planets. It's a square, but it's still making an aspect very tightly to his moon. So he had very, very unusual thinking, very out of the box, radical thinking, right? He was a radical. He was a rebel. He was a radical. We can see that here. But then that's not even it. Look at all these stationary planets, 3 stationary planets. I mean, that's absurd. It's absurd. Mercury is moving at the incredibly slow speed of 4 minutes and 6 seconds. And I think this is per 24 hours. Yeah, 24. Oh, no, that's not. This is, so that's very slow. Like mine's pretty slow. It's at 17 minutes, and that's quite slow. But, Tony Robbins and Osho, and I don't know who else, have a stationary Mercury at 4 minutes. Now his Jupiter, his guru, is very slow at negative 21 minutes. It's stationary retrograde. So it's just moving backwards at 21 minutes per day. And then Neptune is exactly still, 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. So Jupiter, we can see here the wisdom. This is his guru, the neighborhood guru, the guru who's like shooting the shit with his neighbors and telling dirty jokes. But stationary is stationary. And stationary means incredibly powerful. That's what it means. It doesn't have to be exalted to be powerful. A stationary planet is incredibly powerful because it means it's focused. It means it's able to penetrate deep into one area. And so it's able to come up and see things that nobody else can see. Neptune, the planet of spirituality, the planet of imagination and vision and idealism and creativity. It's trining his Mercury, which is also stationary, and his Venus and his Mars and his Moon, all these planets, basically, the whole thing. And then Mercury, the planet of intellect. I mean, the guy was a genius. I'm not kidding. He was a genius. If you have a stationary Mercury, you're genius. I'm sub-genius by this because mine's not stationary. It's 17 minutes, but that's pretty slow. So I'm tooting my own horn there. But yeah, the Sun conjunct, he's really able to connect with so many people with this connection. And this is, I mean, this is profound. It really is. 3 planets, Jupiter and Neptune both represent higher spirituality. And then Mercury represents the lower mind, the intellect, the logic, right? He could take it on any level. He could take it high, he could take it low, and he'll just come out on top because that's how brilliant he was. I had North Node in Aries in the 11th house cusp that deals with the groups and networks and, you know, the cult, the gathering around of a central theme. And he always had this ashram, like he always had this gathering, this group of dedicated people, and that's 11th house. And they were very rebellious, very unique, you know, liberated about sex because that's the whole 8th house thing. And Uranus is liberated. Uranus represents liberation and freedom. It represents the breaking of boundaries, breaking free from all rules and boundaries, right? So he had this very liberated cult group who got into trouble because, again, Mars ruling it, and it also rules the 6th house. It's in the 7th house, getting in trouble with government, which they did. They did some very bad things, and they were very, very extreme, as Uranus is. Just, you know, I mean, everything that you'd expect from the crazy Uranus and in Aries, selfish cult-like thing, you know, with Osho at the helm. But he attracted a lot of people, North Node in the 11th, and all this, and he was incredibly, very, very influential, very influential. I mean, he did have issues. I mean, he had a lot of issues, and not only that, health issues. And he experimented himself with drugs, not to his benefit, but he was always experimenting and trying different things. And like, and by the time before he died, I think he was glad to die because he said his body was a living hell. I don't know. I think he probably just experimented too much and did too many crazy things to himself. You know, we get this square to Chiron in the 12th. That can't be good. It's got to mess with his inner mind, his subconscious. These oppositions to Pluto. I mean, he had a lot of problems, no doubt, but he was a genius at the same time, right? So, that's pretty much it. That's Osho in a nutshell. Can't really think of anything else to add to all that. I mean, we can see all the controversy, all the manipulation, all the hidden agenda, the secrecy. I could imagine him getting involved in occult-like stuff, like magic, rituals, secret hidden stuff that he wouldn't show to the public. His 8th house is very secretive. We're not going to know everything about Osho because of that. 8th house Lord is in the 8th house, so the secrets remain secret. So there's a lot of secretive stuff that happened in his cultish ashram in his groups and network circles, and career success, you know, all that. House wishes, hopes, wishes, dreams, career success. So yeah, that's Osho. Huge figure, controversial, manipulative, hidden agendas, all that, but incredibly wise at the same time. I'm not going to sell him short. I'm just going to be like, I mean, some people are just like afraid of Osho. You can tell they're like, oh no, don't quote Osho. He was a bad man. He did all this and that. I'm like, just get lost. Like, I mean, we gotta, you don't dump out the baby with the bathwater. Just because he was a controversial figure and he did some stuff that I wouldn't do and don't want to be involved in, doesn't mean I'm just gonna like write him off completely. That's nonsense. I mean, he was a highly evolved human being who was played a very big game that sometimes did, you know, got him into trouble. So what? It's written in his chart. He was a monkey. He was like a guru monkey, right? That's the way I see Osho. He was a trickster, and he had to be. He didn't have to be, but I mean, his chart says he was. So I'm not at all against Osho. I think he's awesome. You just have to not fall into any of his manipulative tricks. That's all, because he's got that monkey thing going on. That Pluto opposite all these planets in the 8th house, and you know, the square to Uranus makes him a monkey. So, and the 8th house, 7th house sun in Sag, right? Gemini Ascendant, all that. Very monkey-ish. Okay, that's it for now. If you enjoy this, again, if you want to book a reading, go to my website, macroastrology.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. All right, thank you. Bye.